lime green one.
Baruch Hashem.
I was able to...
Baruch Hashem and Baruch Haba, welcome tonight to our advanced study here at Congregation Mashiach Yisrael. I'm Scott Siskin, and we're going to be studying chapter 4 of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe's magnum opus, Rabbi Schneur Zalman of Liadi. Before we begin, Mi yiftach otanu b'tefila uvracha. Who would like to open us in prayer and a blessing?
Bob would.
I would.
And Lisa would.
Baruch Hashem. Go ahead.
I will. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, we thank you again for another week of Tanya. We thank you so much for your goodness and your mercy that you've shown to us. We thank you for your love and your mercy and your grace. We thank you tonight for this opportunity to learn about your Tanya. We thank you for our Rabbi Scott Siskin, and giving him the wisdom, the knowledge to impart to us and to be able to grow each and every week. And we thank you for all of those that are joining us tonight. We ask that you would bless them and encourage them and strengthen them in your word. In Yeshua's name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. And TGFS, thank God for Shabbat.
Amen. Amen. It's Motzai Shabbat now, but Baruch Hashem indeed. We'll say a quick bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivan la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us and betroths us with his mitzvah, with his commandments, and calls us to engage in the study of his Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
All right, so chapter 4. We'll go right ahead and jump in here. Where have we been? Remember chapter 1? The Alter Rebbe was trying to...
1, 2, and 3.
Yes. Chapter 4 comes immediately after chapter 3. Write that down.
So important.
In chapter 1, in the title page, the Alter Rebbe begins his work of Tanya here, and he tries to explain to us with a full and proper and complete explanation, as well as possible through a text, which important verse of the Bible?
Oh.
A little later than that, actually. Deuteronomy.
What was the question?
What's the verse that the Tanya is based on?
It's near to you.
Yes.
In your
Deuteronomy 30.
Verse 14.
Yeah.
This thing, Torah and mitzvah,
It's nigh you.
is near to you.
There it is.
Go ahead.
For it is exceedingly near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, to explain clearly how it is exceedingly near, in a lengthy and short way, with the aid of the Holy One, blessed be He.
In this long, shorter way,
Amen.
which we talked about.
What scripture is that? Because it doesn't say the scripture.
30:14.
30:14.
The barn.
Deuteronomy.
Well, there it is, way bottom.
30:14.
See the footnote?
Oh, gotcha.
So this is what Tanya comes and sets out to try to explain. How is it possible for me to serve a God that I can't see with all of my heart and my mouth in order that I should actually do these mitzvot, right? In my mouth, fine, I won't speak evil. In my hands, fine, I'll do God's will. I'll do his mitzvot. But in my heart, I can't tell you to love anything. I can't command someone to love. Either you love someone or you don't.
That's the most important one. Because what you have in your heart that comes out.
That's certainly what Mashiach said, right?
Mm-hmm.
That said, it doesn't seem very clear. It doesn't seem very obvious to us, right? You can't command somebody to love anything. Either you love it or you don't, right? Most of us don't love God in a way that we would love our spouse, right? Or we don't love God the same way we love 7-layer cake, right? Most of us are afraid of terrorists and earthquakes and, the power going out and things like this. So how do we develop this passionate love and fear for God? Because Moses, in Deuteronomy, using God's word, said it's very easy for us. It's very near. In your mouth and in your heart that you should do it. La soto. So, in order to explain this, the Alter Rebbe began in chapter 1 to define this term, and book 1 here is called Sefer Shel Beinoni, the book of the intermediate. What is a tzaddik? What is a righteous person? What is a rasha? What is a wicked person? And what is this concept of the intermediate? And we said even though colloquially we might say that you could say it's a person with half sins, half merits, and half demerits, right? Half sins and half mitzvahs. That can't be the case because Rabbi said, I, for example, am a Beinoni, right? And we know that he spent his entire day studying Torah, so he didn't have time to commit half sins, right? So we need a more perfect explanation. To do this, the Alter Rebbe, let's keep that near the microphone if we can.
Okie dokie, sure.
To do that, the Alter Rebbe began to explain the spiritual composition of our bodies, of our souls, and of the world, right? So we discussed that we are each made up of 2 souls, right? All other creations got one utterance of the 10 utterances of creation. God said, let there be an elephant, right? He didn't really say it like that. He said, let the earth swarm forth with creatures and others, all these different creatures. We got 2 utterances. Let us make man in our image. He formed us from the clay, and let us breathe he breathed the breath of life into our nostrils, and that's our godly soul. So we have this animal soul made from the dust, the klipat noga, and we have this godly soul which comes directly from God's essence. This is the imagery of breath that the Bible chooses to use. Okay? In that sense, we discussed that each godly soul is broken up into 3 parts. The 3 parts are nefesh, ruach, and neshama, right? There's 2 other parts as well, but these are the 3 parts that are contained within your body. So it's the subject matter. The nefesh is the part of your soul that energizes the action part of you, right? The fact that I can use my soul to influence my body to pick up a book, right? That's controlled by the nefesh aspect of my soul. There's the ruach aspect of my soul. This energizes my emotions. And the neshama aspect of our soul, which energizes our thoughts. Okay? Last week we said that each one of these 3 parts can be broken up into 10 pieces, right? The soul is going to express itself through these 10 faculties. And we said that this is very similar to God's attributes, and this is what it really means when the Bible says, let us make man in our image. It means by this image of the sphirot, right? Chochma, bina, da'at, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, chesed, gevura, teferet, kindness, severity, compassion, netzach, hod, yesod, endurance, humility, and bonding or friendship, and malchut, kingship or sovereignty, or the ability to communicate, right? Speech. This is the stuff that God can do, hence these are the things that we can do. And our soul, literally a part of God, our godly soul is literally a part of God, expresses itself through these 10 prisms, if you will. Okay? These 10 prisms are incredibly difficult for us to change, but they're possible for us to change. This book is called The Long, Shorter Way, right? It's so that we can influence what we understand, therefore we can end up influencing what we feel, and thereby actually love God with a real pure heart, and not just love 7-layer cake. As such, when we talk about things like understanding, right? Can you change the way that your soul expresses understanding? The example that I heard today was from Rabbi Gordon there. He had said, what if I wake up one morning and I realize that I'm not knowledgeable enough and I want to know more, right? I want to learn geometry. So what do? You have to go and you have to get up and you have to learn geometry. How long does it take?
Open the book.
Open the book, right? You got to study. You got to allocate time to it. Mm-hmm. So if that's what the process is going to do, how long does it take to learn calculus? How long does it take to learn Kabbalah? How long does it take to learn
a lifetime?
Gymnastics, right. It takes a long time. It takes generally a long time, and that's true for all of these 10 attributes of our soul. You can change them. It happens every day, but it's a long, tedious process, right? Just like learning something. It's the same thing. Tonight, in chapter 4, we're going to talk about not the elements of the soul, right? The soul is these 10 things. It is these 10 expressions of intellect and emotion, but the soul also has 10 instruments of expression, right? 3 rather. The soul has 10 faculties and 3 instruments of expression. 10 soul powers and 3 what we're going to call tonight garments of the soul. And we use the imagery of garments because garments are easy to change, right? The 3 garments of your soul are thought, machshava, speech, dibur, and maaseh, and deed, right? Thought, speech, and deed. Thought, speech, and action. Those are the 3 garments of your soul. I can at any time choose to act or not to do, right? To do or not to do. I can choose at any time to speak words or to be silent. I can choose at any time to think thoughts or push a thought out of my mind and think about something else, right? You can't not think about anything. Humans' minds are running it all the time. But you can push a negative thought out of your mind and choose to think about a positive thing. You can review your last Torah class, right? As opposed to thinking, I'm no good, I'm no good. These are things that we can do instantly. And again, we use the imagery of garments because you can change your clothes relatively easily. Rabbi Gordon said if you're going to go to bed, right, you should wear pajamas, right? I'm going to choose pajamas. If I'm going to a ball, I'm going to wear a tuxedo. If I'm going to go play golf, if I'm going to go
vice versa.
if I'm going to go play football, I'm going to put on shoulder pads and cleats. And I'm not going to need those things in a court setting, right? For example, there's going to be different things that you're going to wear for different things. And these can help your soul to express itself, but they don't really change what your soul is. They're not who you are. Your clothes aren't who you are, but they help bring out who you are, right?
Right.
So this is the concept of garments. This is where we're going tonight. And we're going to talk about the garments of the godly soul, and we're going to find out that that is very quickly going to become a bit of a quagmire for us, and hopefully we can find our way through with God's help. So the introduction for chapter 4 from our handy-dandy map of Tanya here. The godly soul has, in addition to 10 faculties, which constitute what they are what we understand, we are what we feel, also 3 instruments of expression, or 3 garments of expression. Thought, machshava, dibur, speech, and maaseh, action. Okay? Thought, speech, and action. Those are our garments. With that as our introduction, who would like to begin reading for us? Go ahead.
I have a question about this. That's the reason I want to read.
Well,
In addition,
Okay.
every divine soul, Nefesh Elokit, possesses 3 garments.
Nefesh Elokit would be the godly soul. Right? We're talking specifically godly here, though we're going to assume that it's the same for both.
Thought, speech, and action expressing themselves, and listen to this, this staggered me, in the 613 commandments of the Torah. For when a person actively fulfills all the precepts which require physical action, and with his power of speech, he occupies himself in expounding all the 613 commandments and their practical application, and with his power of thought, he comprehends all that is comprehensible to him in the parties of the Torah, Pardes, then the totality of the 613 organs of his soul are clothed in the 613 commandments of the Torah. So before we get into that, think about this. We go to the wedding feast that we just read in Shul, and Yeshua says to the guy, how did you get in here without your wedding garments?
Right.
If this is really the garments he's talking about,
We need to understand
do
this.
the reality check of that, because that's extreme.
I mean, do you
That's
think
saying better than just, oh, I'm nice.
Right.
I always make fun of the,
It's a big deal.
the nice commandments. It's like, there are no nice commandments. There are real commandments that you do, you got to think about, you got to make a choice to do them, and then you physically got to do them.
Right.
And then they reap that slow burning result that we talked about if you want to learn something.
Right.
So if this is what he's really talking about with the garments, that's like a reality check.
It is. So let's just make sure that that's clear for everybody. There's a parable that Mashiach brings in, was it Matthew 24? With the
wedding feast?
wedding garments, the wedding feast, right?
I think it's a 24,
Something. I apologize. There's a parable that Mashiach brings down, and he says that there is this feast held by a king, right? This great grand wedding feast, and he invited all kinds of people, and then those people weren't going to make it, so then other people came, and they didn't have these garments, right? They didn't have wedding
They were all
garments.
preoccupied with worldly endeavors.
Right, their garments were preoccupied in physical action that helped their animal soul, with words that helped their animal soul, and with thoughts that gratified themselves, right? That had nothing to do with godliness.
Taking care of worldly business every day.
And right here, before again we get into it, it says that the garments of the godly soul are going to be mitzvahs and Torah, right? If I'm giving charity, that's an action, that's a godly action, right? So if you're not doing those things, and you're found in that feast, what happened at the end of the parable? They were cast into this outer darkness.
Outer
What does this mean? I mean, what did Mashiach mean when he made that parable? God knows it's taught enough. Does it mean that we got to be, like, to your point, do you think it's because we just got to be nice and that's what Mashiach is saying?
I hear that. I actually just heard that again. I've been hearing that my whole life, but I'm a good person.
And people make this argument.
And that's wonderful. You're supposed to be a good person. Thank God. That's not... Nice commandments, I don't think are going to get you where you need to go.
God's commandments will.
God's commandments are going to get you where you need to go. And those things that nobody wants to do because they're so busy doing everything else.
Right.
It's those
they're
things.
They're using their garments and they're always playing golf.
You're using your thoughts, your
right?
speech, and your action to do the busyness, which I agree is overwhelming of every day. We're all like knee deep and crazy busy. But that's not going to win it in the end. In the end, it's that 10%, your tithe of your time, your energy, your thoughts, your mitzvah, your how you live your life in your core is, I always look at as your 10%, so to speak.
And that's such a great way to look at it, right? God doesn't expect us to spend our entire day giving charity. He expects us to work most of the day and then give some charity, right?
Right.
10%.
Right. And like Rabbi Gordon says, I love Rabbi Gordon, if you're at work, you're supposed to be thinking about work. You're not
Right.
supposed to be thinking about, whatever.
The mystical meaning of the Shema when you're making the incision,
Right.
if you're a surgeon,
If
right?
you're a
You should be
surgeon.
thinking about what you got to do. right?
Be present and do your best 100% with everything you do all day is really honoring God. You're working for God.
That's right out of the
But
Talmud.
your 10% is when you have your time to pray, when you have your time to your core of making sure that you're doing what He asks you to do, because that makes the world a better place and it guarantees your portion in the Torah.
Well, it makes sure that you maximize what God has for you here, and that's going to maximize your reward ultimately as well, right? I mean, that's just math. So I think it's very important for us to realize that. And maybe Mashiach makes another parable. He talks about you should build up wealth in heaven, right? Not wealth here where people could get to it or it could rust, etc., right? But real stuff. And every time we do a mitzvah, we're building for ourselves a garment for this wedding feast. And so critical for us to important. So let's look at these.
Do we want to hear those words? How did you get in here? Oh my
How did
God,
you
wouldn't
get
you
in here?
die?
Right. I mean, you might have had the passcode to get through the door.
Yeah.
But what happens when the security
Once
finds
you're in
you?
the door,
Right.
he's like, hey, wait a minute.
So let's just take another look at this. Again, for the animal soul, these garments of thought, speech, and deed are going to be associated with klipat noga, right? They're going to be associated with mundane activity. They're going to be associated possibly with negativity, right? With sinful action. That's the garments of the animal soul. Garments of the godly soul are always going to be involved in godly stuff, not neutral stuff, godly stuff. So there's 3 levels here. Godly stuff, noga, which is mundane, it could go either way stuff, and impure stuff, that's tied. We can't ever touch that, right? You're never going to be able to elevate a pig, for example. There are ways,
Holy
but it's
bacon?
not this
I
book.
don't know.
This. No holy bacon yet.
I read the book.
So, the godly actions, what's an example of a godly action?
Prayer.
Prayer is you speak prayer. Let me give us a godly action. Tzedakah.
Action.
Tzedakah,
Okay.
very good. Well, give us one more example. Let's actually get a couple. Most mitzvahs are physical action based.
Putting on tefillin.
Putting on tefillin, right? What do you got to do? Put it on.
Put
right?
it on.
Think of something else. Tzitzis, same thing.
Tzitzit.
Put on the tzitzit. Let's get some woman-oriented ones.
Making challah.
Making challah, right? You have to knead the dough. You have to give a piece to the Kohen. Lighting Shabbos candles.
Lighting Shabbos candles.
Light them, right? You need to. These are action garments of our soul, and God would prefer if we spend our time here that He's given us using our actions in a godly way. How does God define godly way? Mitzvah, right? The stuff that He asks you to do, and not doing the stuff that He finds abominable or repulsive, right? That's what God expects of us, and this is the oath that our soul was made to take in the beginning of chapter 1. Be tzaddik and don't be rasha, right? Be righteous and don't be wicked. Which again, we're going to layer after layer look deeper and deeper into that. What about speech? Bob gave us a good example. Tefillah, right? Prayer. Prayer. When we speak words of prayer, our garment of speech is being used in a godly way. Are there other examples?
Teaching Torah.
Teaching words of Torah, speaking words of Torah, absolutely. Is it limited there? What about words of encouragement? Right? What about words to help another? Would this be considered godly? It depends on if it's connected to a mitzvah or not. Typically, words of encouragement are usually connected to mitzvah. So in that case, love your brother as yourself. You would want yourself to feel good. You make that other person feel good. You fulfilled a mitzvah of God, well, part of His will, through your garment of speech. This is very good. Right? What about thought?
I think that's the most important.
Well, there's an interesting debate there. Traditionally, the rabbis have said action is the most important thing, right? In the end of the day, don't kill that person, give that person charity, right? That's the most important because it's beyond you, right? And God, this is the world of action, and God put us here to do action, so that's why it's most important. On the other hand, Chassidus comes and says, well, the fact of the matter is, garment is the most external of these 3 garments.
Right? It starts in the thought.
Action is the most external, right? Thought, everything begins with, and we're going to learn there's a 5-step process: intellect, emotion, thought, speech, deed. It always goes in that 5 steps for everybody. So thought is a much higher, it's a much more intimate, internal, essential aspect of myself is my thoughts. So if you let poison get to that, it's a much worse situation. It's a much worse scenario. So like I said, there's a debate and they're both right.
Well, your thought is your rudder, of where you're going to go. Because if you think,
Well, it eventually, ultimately directs your actions.
right.
Right. Exactly. Thoughts. Example of godly thoughts. How do we understand godly thoughts? Right, thinking I'm no good, I'm never going to make it.
Right.
That's a negative thought. Okay.
Right. But, and thinking what Torah says instead of what you think, especially if you're discouraged,
Thinking
you're
words of
tired,
Torah.
too angry, too lonely, too high, all those things.
All of those things.
If you think, okay, well, everything that, and there's a million things in the Bible, especially the New Testament, that paraphrases easily. Everything is fine. Everything is in God's will, and
That's where the faith part comes in, right?
well, that and it's a pep talk. It's just like the Psalms. It's like they're that every day where you put your feet on the road to walk out the path of life. Hod.
Right?
Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
Man looketh upon the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh upon the heart.
Right?
What's on the heart.
Fact is, God sees everything, but that means that He focuses on the
It
heart.
seemed like there's a place where Yeshua said something about someone doing something, but to do it from an evil heart. There's such a thing as someone saying something good,
Yes.
Right.
out of an evil
Yes.
heart. In their heart,
Yes.
they're hoping for your destruction.
Yes.
But
How
they're
many
gonna
people
paint
do
a
we
nice
know
God
does
sees
that?
that.
Right.
A million
So
of
that's that's a
Yeah.
subtle.
You can't really call that a
thing.
mitzvah, right?
them. Right.
Yeah.
Now, that
Right.
concept, before we go further with it, is very important, very critical, and it's something that we absolutely need to understand, which is why the Alter Rebbe is dedicating no less than 12 chapters of Tanya to that later. So we're going to definitely hit that concept of kavana, right?
Yeah.
Intention, emotion, what's going on here when you're doing whatever. Very important concept. We're just not going to hit it until a little bit. Let's get some more foundation first. So you said it right before when you said thoughts. How can we occupy ourselves with godly thoughts? Thinking words of Torah, right? Understanding words of Torah, which is where this word pardes comes in, which needs to be understood. So the Alter Rebbe here says, just backing up a little bit, and with his power of thought, he comprehends all that is comprehensible to him in the pardes of the Torah. What is the pardes of the Torah? I'll give you a hint. It's an acronym.
The 4 levels of Torah exegesis or interpretation.
Absolutely true. Torah point for Bob. The 4 levels of Torah interpretation. What are the 4 levels?
Pishat,
It's an acronym. Pardes is Peshat,
Remez,
Remez,
Drash,
Drush,
Drush, and Sod.
So, right, exactly right. So let's define those. Peshat.
Hello, my friend.
So we're saying,
Ding.
This is
Josie?
Josie. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Welcome.
Shalom.
welcome.
Hi.
Baruch haba.
Hello. Sorry, I'm late.
That's
no
okay.
worries at all.
Not a problem.
No worries at all. We really just started.
So we're talking about the
okay.
godly soul, right? The godly soul has 3 garments. We can express ourselves in 3 ways: thought, speech, and deed. And we said that when our godly soul expresses godly action, it looks like a mitzvah, right? He's giving charity. She's lighting candles. He put a mezuzah. He's wearing tefillin. These are godly actions. And then we have speech, godly speech, things like saying Shema, things like tefillah, prayer, right? This is using our speech for godly means and not for negative stuff. And then we were talking about thought, godly thoughts, right? Not just, pushing aside negative thoughts, but specifically using godly thought to understand Torah, right? And when we understand Torah, we understand it on 4 levels, which is this acrostic or this acronym of
How do you
pardes.
So it's Peshat?
Peshat,
How do you spell Ramesh?
remez is R-E-M-E-Z,
Easy. And then
Derush,
D-E-R.
U-S-H,
U-S-A.
and then Sod is S-O-D. So we're defining those 4 aspects, Josie. That's where we've been, and that's where we are.
Actually,
Right.
one simple explanation of Sod, which is kind of going backwards, is what we're doing now.
Yes,
right?
it is. Yes, it is. So let's start at the beginning. Pardes are these 4 levels in which a Jew understands Torah, right? 4 levels which you can interpret the Bible. Peshat, from the word like pashut. Pashut in Hebrew means simple, right? It's a simple, straightforward, literal explanation of the text. The Bible says Moses took his wife and sons, and he put them on a donkey, and they went from Midian to Egypt. So that means there was a man with 2 eyes, 2 ears, and a nose, and he put his wife and 2 kids on a donkey, and they went from this place called Midian to this place called Egypt. That's the Peshat, right? That's the literal interpretation of the text. What about Remez? And by the way, no explanation or interpretation of Torah could ever leave the Peshat. It always has to agree with the Peshat. Otherwise, it's not a really valid or kosher Torah explanation, right? Mm-hmm. So, Remez. Remez is Hebrew for hint. Torah point for John. Remez is Hebrew for hint. What are the hints? What are the clues? What are the allusions of the Torah?
Verses that complement one another, teach the same doctrine or add a little to that same doctrine.
Right. So you can find phrases, for instance, certain words show up in the Bible in certain places, and it's always kind of like a tag, and you see that it belongs to that spot. For example, we have a holiday coming up. If I was going to say, with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, what am I talking about?
Exodus.
Exodus, right? God took us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. If I were to say only begotten, right? You know I'm talking John 3:16, right? This is just chunks of words that always go this way, and you can always tell where it is. Another example of the remez would be gematria, right? Each Hebrew letter has a numerical value or equivalent, so each Hebrew word has a number. For example, Abraham has a numerical value of 248, which is kind of an important number. And you find, okay, anything that you have that's related to 248, it's going to be related to this concept of Abraham somehow, right?
What is 248 mean?
The limbs, the 248 positive
gotcha.
mitzvah.
Actually, I had started a statement earlier about the fish, and the only thing I got a remez, but I'm still not sure exactly what it might fully mean. The gematria of Bezalel is 153.
But what does that number mean?
Wow.
Yeah.
What does that number mean?
That was the number of fish, right?
Number of fish in John 20, I think it is.
How about that?
Right. And
That's
Bezalel,
cool.
of course, was the great master architect
At
that built the
13,
Mishkan.
hello.
153 is
Bar
a number
mitzvah
highly
age.
connected to the Mishkan. Beautiful.
Nicely done, Bob.
Yes, I'm here.
Shalom.
Hello? Yes, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Awesome.
Baruch Hashem. So,
Yes.
we've covered Peshat and Remez. What's an example of Darush? Darush is Hebrew for searching.
It's not Darash, it's Darush.
The word midrash is typically where the Darush part of Torah exegesis comes.
Where's where I get
comes
the
to.
from?
That's where that comes from, right? But Darush means to search, right? So this is what we usually call the story behind the story. That's what midrash is, right? We know that Abraham has appearances in the Bible, right? He shows up and he does different things, right? And the first time you ever hear from him, he's already leaving his place, had left his place. And the fact is, we learn in the Midrash that there's a whole bunch of stories about Abraham that happened when he was back in Ur of the Kasdim, right? The whole story where Abraham was smashed up his father's idol shop, and he got thrown into the fiery furnace, and he wasn't burned at all. I mean, these are all wonderful lessons for us, but the fact of the matter is, the Torah didn't contain those letters. It didn't contain those words for some reason. Because the narrative of the Torah, the sequence of letters of the Torah, is a sacred divine thing, and it needs to convey exactly what it needs to convey in that order and in that time frame. And if God didn't want specifically for the text of the Torah to contain the information about Abraham in the furnace, he made sure that that information was included in the oral Torah, right? In the oral law that we've been passing on since even before Moses, really.
Could you say deeper meaning?
Deeper meaning? All of these are deeper meaning.
Adds to the simple meaning.
They all
but
add to the
doesn't
simple
go
meaning.
quite as far as the hidden or mystic meaning.
Right. But there are certainly aspects of Midrash that mirror and are very similar to Sod concepts, right? To the secrets of Torah. So I guess that brings us to Sod. Sod means secret. These are the hidden bits of Torah, right? Stuff that is you can find in the text of the Torah, but you need to first be told to look for it, and then you'll be able to see it. Example would be all of Kabbalah, right? The concept of the Sefirot. The Tanya that we're studying right now, all of this information comes from the Bible, but it's not laid out in a nice, clean, easy paragraph that you would be able to read, right? But these mystical concepts are what run the entire universe, and it's all part of Torah, right? All based on the Peshat of Torah again, right? Nothing leaves the Peshat. So
Can I
that's,
say something?
yeah,
Sure.
I was going to say, that's an
Right.
explanation of the
This
pardes,
is-
so
right.
go ahead.
This is what Yeshua did. He used a lot of drush when he was teaching.
Absolutely.
Yes.
A lot
he
of
did.
his teaching was drush.
That's exactly right. He did.
And typically, anytime you use a parable to explain Torah concept, that's a midrashic thought, right?
Which is
Typically,
a very
not always.
old Jewish custom
Very
that you
old.
would not know about, because the first time it shows up in the Torah is from Yeshua himself.
Very true.
But in the writings, they use a lot of parables.
I mean,
So you think it's new, but it's not new. It's old.
it's a very old concept, right?
He gave a new twist on some of the very old parables. The other rabbis
Very
used,
true, too,
right?
yeah. I mean, Yeshua is not the first person in the Bible where we start seeing parables, but the fact is, it's an ancient custom, right? It's a super ancient custom. And that's kind of related to our Tuesday night class a little bit. Anybody who comes to read the Bible from a 20th century perspective and doesn't have the context that they were living in, you're really not going to be able to get
You're
much
gonna dismiss
information
the whole
from it,
book.
right?
And I think you have a different interpretation of it, too.
Absolutely, a much deeper and more profound one.
It's like that old thing, you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from. You know what I'm saying?
Very true with Tuesday study.
You know, Scott, for all the years before I met you and relocated here and all,
Yeah.
I used to say to people that, you know, there's always the, you know, we talked about Remes, I think the first couple of days after we met, I'm like,
It's a
he said this, he
foundational
said
thing.
this, he said this. But there's a place in the scripture where it says, he that made the ear can he not hear, he that made the eye can he not see.
Right.
And I would say to people, you know, if men are able to write stories
Hollywood
and
school, right?
employ metaphor and allegory, and there's like 3 or 4 layers to what's being said in the story. If men are able to do that,
How much
does it make sense that Almighty God is
That's a good
capable of
point.
doing that and would communicate that way, his thoughts and his heart that way?
And
That's
that's
a good
exactly
point. That's
the
a
point.
very good
And
point.
in
Fundamental
70
point.
layers.
70
No.
layers, right?
And I mean,
70
And
faces
that
every
is the
verse of the
reason
Torah.
that is one indication of our Creator,
Right.
us being His created in His image, as you said, the
Right,
midot.
exactly.
Because we could do that a little bit.
Because if men do it, that's indicative
That
of
God
a
is the
Creator
master of it. Right?
That's brilliant.
who's, you know,
100%. Excellent addition.
That's
Thank you.
brilliant.
it meant a lot to me.
Baruch Hashem. And I mean, it's important too because there's so many good believers out there, right? And they only ever read the Peshat of the
Why
text.
is that? Why is that? Do you have
Context.
to have a
They
special?
never have the educational background to be able to look deeper. I mean,
is it
anything
that?
that
Is
they
it
do
anointing?
is given to them
is
by
it
the
a
Spirit.
something that
Well,
God puts
it's
in somebody to
Jewish.
say,
This
"I want to
is
go"?
a Jewish form of Bible exegesis.
We just sum up what you're trying to say. If you want to get deeper into the roots of the tree, you need to be connected to the tree, right? You're not going to be able to find it through scientific wisdom, right?
I'm talking about the very first inkling, like John said, which was brilliant. Is if man can do it, and we're in the image of God, then God can do it. Which made him say, probably, I would assume, wait a minute, there's more to this story. What's that little spark that says there's more to this story? Because not everybody that does it is Jewish. There's a million people.
That's so true.
So what is that? Where does that come from?
That's the godly soul. That's the spark of God that lives within somebody, right? And again, remember in chapter 1 at the end, we define this word Jew that we're using throughout the whole book of Tanya as someone who's got a Jewish soul or a righteous Gentile, right? Someone who's not an idolater. They fit in the same way. Their soul structure is just so similar.
But that's the point you make, and we've discussed this several times. Someone goes to the Gospel of Luke or the Gospel of Matthew,
Right.
and so it's a very linear, kind of like reading the story of Black Beauty or something. Like it starts here, it goes to here.
Right,
It's a
right.
very monoplane approach and thought to
I mean,
it.
you got to start someplace, but yeah.
But like, you know, Yeshua quotes Hosea 6. You know, tell me what this means. I would have mercy, not sacrifice.
Right.
Well, in those days, and in the Jewish context, as you say, those guys go, oh, you know, the whole drop down
Right, exactly.
Right.
of everything
exactly.
that was said in that whole 2 chapters
Right.
comes up, and all the midrash and all the commentaries
yeah,
and all the
exactly.
Right.
homiletics
And their brains are going
connected to all of that.
Right.
Those connections.
And so, and that's how in Tanya, he'll mention 3 words
He won't even
out of
finish the
something in
quote.
Isaiah 6 or whatever,
Right.
and everybody's supposed to know. There's an assumption there
That they
you've
know the
already
whole-
read all this,
Right, you're
and
already
familiar with this,
Right.
Right.
So,
true. So
so it bespeaks the illiteracy that so many of in the world are suffering with, and that we're trying to overcome.
That's very true.
Very true.
And it's a big problem. At the
In
same
ourselves.
point,
In ourselves,
right? It's not a problem with the text, right? It's a problem with us.
Right, yeah.
At the same point, we need to,
Sounds familiar.
let's just drop down for a second and kick our feet off the ground before we jump back up. Even the person who connects to the most basic aspect of Torah is connecting to God and godliness, right? And
Right,
the Spirit
absolutely.
works through that. That said, we are the limiting factor in that relationship, right? The point that we stop and close the book and go watch the game is the point where the Spirit can stop speaking to us, right? And God can extend it more than that, right? He finds merit in the littlest things that we do. But at the same point, how much more so if you dedicate yourself to it, or if you immerse yourself in it, if you go through the deeper levels and you try to find the extra meanings, linking it to the other parts of the Bible, which again explains itself. That's a great point.
That was a very good point. That's an interesting way to look at it, isn't it? Okay, we
So,
ready?
questions on Pardes before we continue?
Yeah?
Hello?
Hi.
Hi,
Yes,
please.
I have a question, but I also need to get off the phone. I have a problem, a physical problem, and I need to get off the phone
Gotcha.
and address it. But I do excuse myself. But I do have one question,
Of course.
if I may.
Please.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Rabbi, what is the position of the Messianic Jewish rabbi and teachings in terms of the fact that the Torah was not supposed to be rewritten in any way, or in terms of following the New Testament?
I think that's a pretty actually easy question to answer. We understand the scriptures, and above all the scriptures is the Torah, right? These 5 books of Moses.
Or actually the other way around, the foundation of.
The foundation of, right, exactly right. And from there, I mean, the Talmud itself says, if the Jewish people were righteous, then we would have received the 5 books of Moses and the 1 book of Joshua, and that would have been the whole Bible. Fact of the matter is we weren't righteous, so we needed judges to come along. And we still weren't judges, so we still weren't righteous, rather, so we needed prophets. And we still weren't righteous, right? So then we needed the writings, things like Psalms and Daniel and Ezra and Esther, right? And then we still weren't righteous, and then God sent Mashiach, right? And we still weren't righteous, and then God's Mashiach's disciples gave us even more information, right? So just like the fact that we followed the teachings of Rashi, right? And Rashi was born in 1040 AD and died in 1105 AD, and he's a great foundational leader in the concepts of understanding Torah. So also we understand all the teachers that God has presented to us. I don't think that's a problem at all. Of course, nothing's above the Torah because everything's connected to the Torah.
Okay, but in terms of the New Testament, whether or not the Jewish race is inappropriate and did not obey the Lord, it
Right.
still stands that it was very clear that we were not to rewrite the Torah or attempt to write or add to it.
Well, there are no new mitzvah given.
I'm sorry?
She's talking about right.
There are no really new mitzvah given in the new covenant.
Amen.
As Scott had said, everything has its foundation in the Torah that we received at Sinai.
I'm not talking about mitzvahs. I'm talking about the Torah. I'm talking about the fact that where the Messianic teachings, we follow the New Testament. So I'd like to know where you stand in terms of what is the belief or the how do you explain following the Testament, the New Testament, if we're not supposed to touch the Torah or touch it in any way or deviate from it in any way or change it in any way?
I think that's a very good question. The fact is, we believe here that the New Testament did not change any aspect of Torah whatsoever. In fact, we go through a pretty in-depth class on Tuesdays where we explain how nothing actually changed.
Except
God's
for maybe
message.
the Yom Kippur sacrifice.
Well, we'll talk about that.
But yeah, that's getting technical.
God brings us to a greater understanding of His Torah and His Word through His prophets. The message of every prophet, Mashiach included, was always to return to the Torah and its mitzvot. And as Rebbe Tzalel here said, there are no new mitzvot in the New Testament. And if you're talking about taking the Torah and expanding it, right, there's obviously a mitzvah that we're not allowed to add to the Torah, but the New Testament's not Torah. We study Torah, and the New Testament is rooted
writings.
in the Torah.
Additional
Just
writings.
like the Psalms, just like the
All
prophets.
right, so,
The
so
Tanya
you're
here's
saying that the
additional
New
writings.
Testament
Yes.
is not Torah?
The New Testament is an extension and a growth from the Torah, just like all the rabbinic writings that we have, including Rashi and the
But,
Arizal and everyone in
but
between.
isn't that a form of adding to the Torah?
Not really. In fact, when you think about it, there's a mitzvah that's brought down in Deuteronomy when Moses has these big rocks and he puts the plaster on the rocks and he has to have the people translate the Torah into all 70 different languages. There's a whole big discussion there about how we need to make sure that the Torah is something that people can understand at their level, right? Which means translating it, which means rewriting it, right, into a different language, which it means re-describing it, re-explaining it to another person in another way. This is our mitzvah obligation, and I believe that's included also in Matthew 28.
There's also Deuteronomy 17, which God explained what we should do if there's a question about walking out, living His Torah. A question of halakha for our times.
Very true. And we should always appreciate and respect the rabbinic opinion. Mashiach
To
was a
the
rabbi.
degree that it's not, to the degree that it's not altered in terms of the understanding of it.
Absolutely
Right.
true, which is why we have to place the Torah above everything, right?
Absolutely.
If we find an understanding in the New Testament that doesn't agree with the Torah, we know that we don't understand that part of the New Testament. And that's the end.
And the other thing is, in just my opinion, is I think a Christian concept is the New Testament is Torah. It is not Torah. It is a paraphrased version of the Torah. There's nothing new in it. Read the Old Testament, read the Torah. Everything Yeshua says is right out of the Torah. He's just saying it,
Right.
but it's not replacing it, and it's not Torah. He's the Torah. He's not replacing the Torah. And the writings are people that are trying to help people, and especially an entire race of people that have no background in Judaism at all. Paul and all the writings are trying to paraphrase and show them, okay, you don't come from this background, but we're going to try to teach you how to walk out your life, how to come, and hopefully try to teach them to go back to the Torah and learn what the Torah means. But it's not Torah. It's a paraphrased version of the Torah that he speaks. But he himself says, I didn't come to change it, not one dot or one
5:17.
tittle. I came to fulfill it. It is not Torah. Although Christianity would not probably agree with that, but in Judaism, that's what we believe.
Ribbon up or something?
What's the lady's name?
Josie, we actually, our Messianic congregation is rooted in a lot of Chabad teachings. That's why we're here studying Tanya. And we're not your average Messianic congregation either.
Right. No Christmas and Easter here, unfortunately.
We try to be
Very
truly
fortunate.
Torah observant and follow the mitzvot and actually do all the mitzvot.
And I think that's a big important argument when we talk about the difference, if you will, between the Torah and the New Testament writings, is mitzvot observance, right? Does God expect anything different of us because of
No.
the New Testament?
No.
And again, in length, in our Tuesday night study, we describe how that answer is absolutely no.
That's right.
It's an extension
So
of the same.
it's not a difference in the New Testament. It's way the
Re-explanation.
New Testament has been interpreted.
Yeah.
That's a big
wrongly.
problem, right?
That-
The
that's
history
the
of
real
how
issue.
that, right?
Mhm.
And some of the church fathers and some of the anti-Semitism that was there is a big, huge issue. The Council of Nicaea, etc., etc.
You should join our Tuesday study.
Yeah, I bet you'd enjoy it. Do you think that satisfied your question, or
Partly, at least.
There.
I guess not.
Did she leave it?
We might have lost her.
She said she had to deal with an issue.
Um,
You know, when we get revved up.
We'll try to listen for her to come back.
Anyways, let's continue with where we were. So we were talking about Pardes. Any other questions regarding the 4 levels of Torah interpretation before we continue with the Tanya here?
all right. No, I'm reading.
Go for it.
Specifically, the faculties of Chabad in his soul are clothed in the comprehension of the Torah, which he comprehends as parties. To the extent of his mental capacity and the supernal root of his soul. And does that mean like everybody, it says in the Bible, everybody has a, what does it say, a portion or a...
Shoresh.
Well, they're rooted in a specific sephirah.
That's exactly right.
But I think they also have a level of understanding.
Right.
Is that what it's talking about?
That's what it's talking about.
It talks about that in the New Testament. To the extent of his mental capacity and the supernal root of his soul, and the midot, namely fear and love, together with their offshoots and ramifications, are clothed in the fulfillment of the commandments in the deed and in word, namely in the study of the Torah, which is equivalent to them all. For love is the root of all the 248 positive commandments, all originating in it and having no true foundation without it. Inasmuch as he who fulfills them in truth truly loves the name of God and desires to cleave to him in truth, for one cannot truly cleave to him except through the fulfillment of the 248, which are the 248 organs of the king, as it
248 commandments, which are the 248 organs of the king.
Oh. Mm-hmm. As is explained elsewhere, while fear is the root of the 365 prohibitive commandments, fearing to rebel against the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, or a still deeper fear than this, when he feels ashamed in the presence of the divine greatness to rebel against his glory and to do what is evil in his eyes, namely any of the abominable things hated by God, which are the kalipot and the sitra achra, which draw their nurture from man below and have their hold in him through the 365 prohibitive commandments that he violates. Isn't that interesting?
Very interesting
So
indeed.
listen, if this whole thing goes back to up here,
It
that's
does.
extreme.
It's very extreme.
This is all very extreme.
Let's break it down piece by piece. So, we talk about the faculties of Chabad of his soul, right? We know that each level of our 3 levels of the soul are Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. They all have 10 aspects to them, right? And your soul as a whole has 3 garments. So when we're talking about these garments, and we're talking about specifically thought, earlier we were saying thought, speech, and deed. Thought, when it comes to the concept of pardes, and this just comes to expand on what we read in the previous paragraph a little bit, certain people's souls are rooted in different places. Before we said there are 4 different worlds: Asiya, which where we are, Yitzira, Bria, and Atzilut, right? Your soul could come through any one of those channels, right? It could be associated with any one of the Sphirot. It could be associated with a level of each spirit, right? Each Sphirot, like our souls, has 3 levels: Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. As such, I think we did the math one year. I'm not sure. I don't think I have it written down, but as such, I think there's something like 4,500 different places where your soul could be rooted on high. And of course, those would be 4,500 general places, if that's the right number. Not specific locations, but you could probably branch off even of that, is what I'm trying to say. So you could have a person who is rooted in the world of Berea with the focus on the sphere of Gevura, of the aspect of Neshama or Ruach or whatever, and that's going to be kind of like the roadmap or the address of your soul as it's rooted on high in God, right? So some people are going to be rooted higher, some people are going to be rooted lower. Some people, if it's not Peshat, I don't want to hear it. If it's not Sola Scriptura, right? If it's not in what the Bible literally says, I don't want to hear it. Other people are like, I'm way more interested in the remes, in the hints, in the allusions, in the Bible codes. You know, that's where he is. Or you could have a person who, I like the midrash, right? I like the story behind the story. I want to know the whole history of everything that actually happened there, and I want that truth. Or you could have people who are like, soul is rooted in Atzilus over here, or something like Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And they all can only handle Kabbalah, right? And they say, if it's not Kabbalah, I don't want to hear it, right? I've heard all the other stuff already. I mastered it all. Baruch atah, I got it done. So, that's just a factor of how we understand the Torah and what we are going to actually, that's starting to develop our personality, right? We can start to see where the spiritual root of our personality comes from. And there's more to be said on that. So specifically, we're talking about using the garments in a godly way, in a divine way. And all of this comes originally, remember who we are, right? We are what we understand. That's what we just described. And we are what we feel, the midot. So it's going to be our love and our fear that's making us do whatever the situation might be. And there's a famous thought in Chassidus. It says, nobody does anything that they do not want to do for another person unless they love that person or if they're afraid of that person. And that's the only reason you're going to do it. Otherwise, you're going to say, get it yourself. Right?
Right.
But nobody in history has ever done anything for somebody else that they didn't already want to do unless they were loved that person or they were afraid of that person.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not going to do God's mitzvahs. I have no intention at all of putting on my tefillin every day, except for the fact that God told me to do it, right? That's not something that's self-oriented or didn't come from me, right? He asked me to do it. I didn't have it on my agenda. Now it's on my agenda, right? And that's because I love and fear him, right? And we're going to talk a lot about love and fear, but know just off the start that love, chesed, is going to be the root of all 248 positive mitzvot. God said, do something, and you end up doing it because you love him, right? And then fear would be the root source of all of the 365 prohibitions of the Torah. Don't murder, don't steal, right? I'm not going to do those things because I'm afraid to rebel against the holy King of Kings, King of all kings, right? That's what we learned in this paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the better?
Love.
To do it out of love or to do it out of fear? In his eyes.
Yes.
Love.
Both.
Well, both are good.
Oh, it's
but
the love, fear,
is the,
fear, love. Got
There's
it.
4 levels.
Love
Got
is the better, right? But
You'd
they're
think
both
that.
good.
They're both good.
Mm-hmm.
We learned in previous chapters when we were studying this last year, the 4 different levels. Fear, love, love, fear, right? The Abraham, Isaac, Abraham that we read about in Toldos.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Right, so there's love, basic fear of God. I'm afraid to rebel because I don't want to get punished, right? Some preacher said you're going to go to hell if you do this, so I'm not going to do that now. There's the basic love. I'm a smart guy. I love myself. God gives all the good things. I'm going to do for God, so he should do for me, right? There's the higher love, which is it's not about me. I just love him because of who he is. Then there's the higher fear, which is more of a shame or an awe. You just recognize the greatness of God. It's based on him. It's not based on me. He's so great. How could I possibly rebel against him, right? So it's not, again, me-oriented. It's him-oriented. And those are the 4 levels which we're going to touch on later as well.
There's
So-
a lower and higher.
Of
Fear.
both fear and
Ilah
love.
And
Ilah and Tata.
Tata.
Right. Very true. Torah point for John.
So, is it safe to say, speaking messianically, that if you love Yeshua, you do the 248 positive commandments, which technically is the body of Mashiach.
Right. I'm glad you brought
If
that
you
up.
don't love him, you don't do them.
You're not really part of that body, are you?
John 14.
Doesn't
That's
that
what he
terrify
said.
you? This is
If
crazy.
you love me, keep my commandments, yeah.
Dude, seriously?
And he says these things, and people gloss over
And
them.
people
like,
don't know what, but, you know, the
Even
thing is they don't know what it
Even
means
Messianics.
because they don't know all the other stuff that they think is evil and don't want to do in the first place.
nah, they mastered it all already. Baruch atah, I got it.
Oh, Lord.
Or this is how I interpret it.
Right. This is how I interpret it, and who cares what God thinks about it. All right, so we need to understand this concept just a little bit further. This number, 248, organs of the king, 365 veins and sinews is what we call them. So we have, God is, if we talk about God's soul, right, what's our soul made up of, right? We can look at us and have a paradigm as to what it looks like up there. So my soul is what I understand and what I feel, right? God's soul, what he understands and what he feels, it forms this spiritual body, if you will, right? Again, we're not talking physicality here, we're talking imagery. This is imagery. But that imagery is mirrored in our own body. 248 limbs. What do we have? 206 bones, a dozen or so organs. On top of that, skin, hair, things like this. That's going to equal your 248. And the 300. And what's the job of a limb? What's the job of a positive mitzvah? It's to go and accomplish something that you weren't going to do before, right? Give tzedakah, light the candle, put on the tefillin. The 365 negative commandments are related to our blood vessels and the sinews of our body, right? What do the sinews of your ankle do? Hold your ankle
Hold
together,
up.
right? What do the blood vessels do? They keep blood where it needs to go and not where it doesn't need to go. Blood inside a blood vessel is a symbol of life. Blood on the street is a symbol of death, right? That's not good. It needs to be contained. This divine holy energy needs to be contained.
It has a dual nature.
Like everything that's made of Noga, right? Everything has a dual nature that's made of Noga. And God himself is the contradiction of all contradictions and contains all complexities. that said, we have this image of God, or Yeshua brings down this exact image, which is pretty fantastic, because, or the New Testament brings it down, because this, and Yeshua brings it down too, this is such a Kabbalistic thought and concept, and it's so right there in the New Testament, and everybody passes over it like it's his idea. I mean, it's obviously his idea, he's God, but you know what I'm saying? It's just fantastic to me that
well, the depth
there's such depth and people don't address it. Right?
That people don't see is dangerous.
It's a problem.
Do you have eyes but
And see not?
see?
Right.
Do you have ears that you don't hear? And he just said that. That's terrifying.
So when Yeshua was talking about this body, when
that's
later Paul
quoted, I think, no less than 3 or 4 times in the New Covenant scriptures.
Yeah.
That verse from Isaiah.
Right. And it's for a reason. And what's the Messianic coming called by Isaiah? Gal Einai, right? The opening of our eyes. All of a sudden we're all going to get it, right? And everybody's going to see all at the same time. What does that mean? There's going to be a man riding on the clouds? Maybe.
It sounds like
Maybe.
Zechariah 8:12, right?
Maybe, you know? Or is it going to be an intellectual understanding, right? The veil is gone, and now all of a sudden I see everything, and I can see Mashiach in every person.
I think it's yes and yes.
I think it's yes and yes and more than we probably could possibly even imagine. May it happen soon in our days. So, when the New Testament's talking about this imagery of the body, what is it talking about? People who are holding up this olive tree. People who are holding up this. And what is the olive? What is the body tree? Or the body tree? What is the body? Whose body is the body?
It's
It's
organs and
Mashiach's
veins.
body.
It's Mashiach's body. And what is Mashiach's body?
248 positive commandments. His is
John
Torah.
is
He's
the
the
Torah.
Torah.
He is the Torah,
He's
right?
the Torah.
So when we're holding
But
up this body, when we're making up this body, and we're going to look at this imagery of us making up the body in depth in a little bit in this chapter, but that's the imagery that's brought down for us, right? We need to be a cell in this body. How many cells are in the body? 75 trillion, something like that. We all have a part to play. There's a piece that my liver contributes to my overall function that allows me to be able to sit here like, I mean, the liver has a lot to do with the sugar balance in your body, right? So you could pass out if your liver's not good, and you certainly can't study Torah if you're passed out, right? So every cell is contributing in some way to the ability for us to perform these mitzvot.
One of those organs that maybe it's the liver actually accumulates glucose, and if your body senses it needs a pump of
That's the liver,
of
yeah.
food, that's the liver, right?
Yeah. Glucagon, it's called. Anyways, this is not a bio class, but still, we get the imagery, right? God gives
We
us
went in
the
that
biological
direction.
imagery, so therefore we have it. All right, thoughts on this so far? Are we ready to move on?
Now these 3 garments deriving from the Torah and
Remember,
its
the godly garments are mitzvot.
Right.
That's an important thing to remember. The garments of the animal soul are noga, or worse, right? So they're not holy stuff.
and its commandments, although they are called garments of the nefesh, ruach, and neshama, their quality nevertheless is infinitely higher and greater than that of the nefesh, ruach, and neshama themselves, as explained in the Zohar, because the Torah and the Holy One, blessed be He, are one. The meaning of this is that the Torah, which is the wisdom and the will of the Holy One, blessed be He, and His glorious essence are one, since He is both the knower and the knowledge.
And the known. As so on. He didn't even finish that third word.
And so on.
As is explained above in the name of Maimonides.
Right.
So we need to understand that fully. That's going to be the remainder of this chapter, is all going to be dealing with this concept.
Okay.
What's the concept?
Well, we've been dancing around it, but when we say the Torah and the garments, the commandments are one, that the Torah,
God is one with the Torah and the mitzvah.
the Torah really is the wisdom and the will of the Holy One.
Right.
The link there is we need to understand the mitzvot are God's instructions and exactly what that will looks like.
Yes, that's very true. That's very true. Now we're going to go even deeper. What that looks like, that's fine in the basic functionality of garments in general, right? But we say garments, it kind of implies that we are higher than those garments.
Thinking, saying, or doing.
Right. Thinking, saying, I am not my thoughts. I am not my speech. I am not my actions, right? Just because I did something, it's not indicative of who I am. It's something I did, right? The real me is deeper. That's what I understand and what I feel. That's the real me, right? However, these garments of the godly soul are actually Torah and mitzvot. The Torah is one with God. It's God's wisdom. The mitzvot are one with God. It's God's will. So the garments of the godly soul are actually higher than the godly soul itself, which is a conundrum, right? That's a paradox of sorts. And we're going to explain it for the rest of this tonight. Just to basically explain this really quickly and easily, hopefully this makes it a little bit simpler. We know the structure of the Sefirot. Keter is on top, Chokhmah, Bina, right? God's will on top, that's Keter, then Chokhmah, wisdom, right? So our souls come from the outside essence, that the nefesh part of that wisdom of God, right? It's truly one with God. So we're truly one with God, but it's an external essence. The root source of God's wisdom is rooted originally in his will, which are the mitzvot, which is what the Torah comes to explain to us, right? So the most internal essence of Chokhmah really is Torah and mitzvot, if you go as high as Keter. However, our soul starts lower in that process, right? That's why the Torah and the mitzvot are higher and more godly than even a single human soul in general. And it's also why when we engage in Torah and mitzvot, that's actually higher than us as a person, right? It's actually more valuable than our whole life is, really.
Another perspective of just what you said. God is higher than our soul, right?
Obviously, he created.
And so when we do a mitzvah and we're in one agreement with God's will,
right,
in mind, we are one with God.
We are actually one with God at that specific moment. When you extend your hand and give charity, if God was there and there was a person who was hungry, what would happen? That person would be fed, right? You fed him. You were God's hand at that moment. So when we are wearing the garment of Torah and mitzvot with our godly soul, at the same time, God's kind of wearing us. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It's kind of confusing, actually. It's a paradox. It's a conundrum. But it's true. And it's a mystical, fascinating fusion and union between us and God at that moment. How awesome it is to do mitzvah, right? We should occupy all of our time doing this. And then you got the whole animal soul. It's got an opinion, too.
This is really, I think, one of the foundational teachings of Tanya.
Absolutely.
Is about the unity. There.
That's the point. That's the point, right? If we can understand that, then it's going to change the way we feel, right? Because we're going to develop an opinion about it with our da'at. It's going to change the way we feel. And the next time I go to put on my tefillin, I'm going to think about all this, and it's going to be a more sublime, spiritual, godly experience. It's going to accomplish more for God's will because my heart's in it now.
Amen.
More than it was yesterday.
In your kavana, you have the proper kavana.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the kavana has been altered, enhanced, upgraded. Thoughts on that? Pretty good so far, hopefully. God bless us.
You can't know, you can't, the way you know someone, the way you know someone's will, the way you know God's ratzon,
sure.
is through his words and his deeds.
Right, he's got to use a garment to give it to you.
And the way you become one with him in them is volitionally you choose
free will
to be one with him in them.
Or not.
It made me think of something I read today, if I may.
Please.
So I think it was heading towards Tabernacles, but there's someone comes to the Lord, he's teaching in his house, and they say, your mother and your brethren are outside.
Mm-hmm.
And
Very
he
good.
said, who is my mother
Right.
and my brethren?
Well, you think he went crazy for a second and forgot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Said, he that doeth the will of my Father is my mother and my brother and my sister.
My flesh, right?
And so the unity with the will of God expressed through his words. So I was thinking about in the Baruch where it says, Kitshana b'mitzvotov.
Right.
We're
Sanctified.
sanctified, we're drawn and connected to him.
Right. We're taken out of mundane and put into holy bucket because of him.
And connected
When we choose to
him.
engage.
That's exactly.
When we choose to engage.
This is from my study today. The Hebrew word is yikud.
Yichud, right? Unity.
Unity, union, unity and oneness with God is attainable through knowledge of the Torah and the fulfillment of the divine commands. That's the mitzvah.
I think we actually opened up our Hebrew class with this, right? What's the only way to connect to God, right?
Torah and mitzvah.
Torah and mitzvah, right? And prayer.
But
and prayer.
that's what it brings, is you could.
That's what it means. You're actually engaging in intimacy with God at that moment, right?
There's an agreement that occurs over time.
Oh, yeah.
How can two walk together except they be agreed?
Uh-huh.
How can a man and his wife be one if they're in disagreement?
Right.
The
house
more they
divided can't
agree,
stand.
the more intimacy, the more love, the more fruit they can bear
Right.
to righteousness, etc.
100%.
Picture of us with the Lord.
Right. So all of that imagery is part of the body, going back to your original statement. And that's something we should understand when we come across it in our personal studies, right?
Thank you.
Baruch Hashem, thank God.
You know
Thoughts?
what?
Yeah.
I mean, this is also out of the glossary. Guys, read this. It's good.
The glossary of this
page
book is good.
A120 to 140. It under the next thing, which is Yikud Zun, it says that the theme of Yikud, which is recurrent in Kabbalah and Chassidut, is the union of both aspects, that is God's transcendence and
That's the Zal
and His
part.
revelation. I
That's
think
the nuclear part.
that transcendence become immanent and creation cease to conceal.
Right. That's the purpose of creation. That's our Exodus 25:8, right? That He should be able to be revealed here in this lowliest world, right? Because this Torah, which is the highest of everything, because it's part of God's will and wisdom, His purpose for creation is this Torah, is this Mashiach, right? This is the purpose of it all. The entire structure of all of creation follows this Torah pattern every time, right? The only creatures actually that don't is in this physical world, which is why, by the way, it's a mitzvah in this world to do mitzvahs, if that made sense. It's a good thing in this world to do mitzvahs. In heaven, they run by the same formula, right? They find a talus and they split up. They find a soul and they split up. That same structure works up there, except there, you don't get any reward for that, because there's no way that you could not do it up there, because up there there's no.
It's perfect.
It's perfect, right? There's no opportunity for evil up there.
Right.
Right, and right now in this physical world, God is His presence and His glory is concealed completely.
Right.
It's like, we don't really see the physical evidence that it exists.
Ever. Scientists have been trying to prove it for like a long time.
But when God remakes things, the new creation, the new order,
Sure.
that He will dwell with man. And that's when that will be fulfilled, that His concealment will be moved away.
That's 100% true. And that's characteristic of Sinai, really, right? This union of heaven and earth, right? That God should be revealed here in this physical world. And again, who did He pick to do that? He chose you, right? He chose us. He chose us to accomplish this. So what a great reward. I mean, what a great honor to be able to accomplish this purpose of creation, right? And it all comes down in the end of the day to mitzvah, right? You're either doing it or you're not doing it. And the same is true in Revelation if you want to read it.
But I think that's why there's such a reward, because it's a great honor for us to be doing it, but by us choosing to do it, like John said, walking in
volition,
agreement, that's what brings Him glory, is because we actually picked it up and chose it, as opposed to
Well, that's
people who
the
don't.
order He made everything in, is that free choice. And that's what He glories in.
Right. And we
Just beautiful.
emphasize the similarities and differences between those two paradigms of serving God with and without Kavana in our famous prayers, especially on Yom Kippur when we sing Avinu Malkeinu, right? He's our Father, we're doing it with love. Malkeinu, He's our King, we're doing it because He's the King, right?
It's interesting, the point that you've made so many times, Scott, about
Torah and mitzvah.
Just try to say.
do the mitzvahs, do the mitzvahs, do the mitzvahs, do the mitzvahs. And so it really, to expand on that, or to agree with that, from the scriptures, it is impossible for someone to merely sit around and contemplate
Not accomplish
Just
who God is and His will and His nature and His attribute, His midot and so forth.
Right, it's a part of it.
But the way to actually know Him is to do His will. You are transformed in that process. There is a transaction, if I can use that word crudely,
Connection.
where there is a transformation that cannot occur without the choice, without the will
Right.
of the creature saying, I will to do
Right.
what you will me to do. I agree with your will.
Right.
And so
That's well put.
a very famous Christian passage in John 8 where the Lord said, if you continue in my words,
Right.
then you're my disciples indeed. And then there's a promise. And you will know the truth. And the truth will set you free. But you can't continue, and that's the root of that word is meno, is to continue to abide, to stay in, to live in.
Right. Right.
Abide.
You can't live in something
That's where the word halacha comes
where
right,
it's
to walk in.
merely a mental ascension process.
Right.
There is a volitional in the world doing and choosing to suborn your will to the divine will.
Right.
In other words, studying
And thus
alone
be
is
transformed
not
in
binding.
that process
Absolutely.
and be unified.
That's so true. And it goes right back to Sinai when we said Na'aseh
That's
v'nishma,
interesting.
You
right?
can't know the
That's
truth
terrifying.
by sitting around and studying it only.
Well, that's heresy.
You have to do it, right? You have to do it. Chapters 38 through 40.
That's one of
No,
the
I'm
most
sorry.
Messianic
Chapters
Jews.
35 through 37 are going to talk about the importance of us actually getting these things done. And that's your point right there. Is
That's crazy.
we need to actually engage in it. We need to walk in it, like you said, abide.
Well,
in the Hebrew halacha.
What he's
right? It means
saying
to walk
is
in.
when
Walk in.
you learn it, it's a transition to doing it.
Right.
Is that you can't just
If
stay
you-
in
if
that
you stop
learning,
it-
you got to do it.
And again,
Interesting.
Sinai, Na'aseh v'nishma, right? We will do and thereby understand, right? We're not going to sit here studying about grace after meals for 2 years and never do it once. We're going to say it when
And
we sit down for a
essentially,
meal.
isn't that the world as it speaks and reads the New Testament today? Is
Right.
they're constantly in that state of studying it, but they never get to it. It's like the cereal aisle. I
Right, right.
believe that this cereal will save my life, but if you don't get up and eat the cereal, it's not going to save your life.
That's true.
Isn't
And you know
that
what? That
interesting?
person was 100% right.
It
His
will
belief
save your
was
life.
correct.
But
he
you got to
never
do
used
it.
Right. He never
Right. And all of
Applied
those
it.
applied
all
it,
of
right.
those writings, no matter who wrote them in the New Testament, is doing that exact thing. It's
Right.
trying to teach them what to do.
Right. And
There's-
there was a huge thing, especially back then. I know it's not Tuesday, but especially back then, when the entire world was idolatrous except for this little island about the size of New Jersey and a little bit of the surrounding areas that believed in one God. Everybody else was idolatrous. And to serve an idol, you had to do all kinds of crazy stuff. So everybody flooding in is trying to say, well, what do we got to do?
Right, and they were trying to show them
And
what to do.
so many great teachers are trying to say it's not about what you do so much as why you need to understand the whole package here, right? And if there's an
But they
opportunity,
didn't do it either. They did it in the first century, but today in Christianity, what do they do? Which is my big gripe is it's awesome. You can stand in, I can stand in my garage all day. It doesn't make me a car.
right?
You can read it for forever, and like John said, unless you make that bridge to actually doing what they're telling you to do, which means the mitzvot,
Right.
to go back to the beginning and do what you got to do, you're just wasting your time. You're
And you
not
could-
accomplishing what you're supposed to be doing.
You could find yourself sometime in outer darkness, God forbid,
God forbid.
right? Because your garments aren't appropriate. Hey, we're on camera. So
That's Messianic Judaism in whole is kind of mostly there. We study the Torah. We believe in the Torah.
right.
You do the Torah.
Well, yeah. Who said we had to actually do it? Right? Oh, may God help us.
All right,
Give
God's
us
got a
time.
plan. It's all good. Okay.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and serious too.
Terrifying.
Where did we leave off?
And all
I
those.
think at the top of page 16, right?
So we just one
Or
more.
about
What'd
Go
you say?
ahead.
I mean, I could do that quick. What were you saying?
No, I was just going to say who's going to read it.
Oh, that's fine. Whoever wants to read is fine. Just to remember the concept we just came from. We are clothed in God's mitzvot and His will, right? And at the same time, He's kind of clothed in us, right? Which means those clothing, these garments, are actually higher than the root source of our soul, no matter where it comes from. Moving on. Did you not want to read? You want to trade off? It's a big chapter.
mean, I can.
It's
I
up
just
to
didn't
whoever.
know if anybody else wanted to. I don't want to
I
hug
could
it all
read
up.
or
And although the Holy One,
So done.
blessed is He, is called Ein Sof, infinite, and His greatness can never be fathomed, and, quote, no thought can apprehend Him at all. And so are also His will and His wisdom. As it is written, there is no searching of His understanding. And can you find God by searching? And again, for my thoughts are not your thoughts. Nevertheless, it is in this connection that it has been said, where you find the greatness of the Holy One, blessed be He, there you also find His humility.
That's from the Talmud. So let's just talk about this for a second. And we're kind of ramping up here, as I'm sure you could tell. So when we talk about the fact that we are engaged in a mitzvah, right? We have this clothing of God on, and God is clothing us at that time. Doesn't it say all over the scripture that there's no way that I could possibly understand or comprehend God, right? We said God and His wisdom are one, God and His will are one, and I understand, don't steal. All right, I'm not going to do it, right? So what exactly does that mean, right? How is it possible that we can understand a mitzvah without breaking what the Bible says about understanding God, when we understand that God and His mitzvot and His will are one, right? That's what we're kind of honing in on.
What's the question?
So the question is, the Bible says we can't understand God, and the Talmud says we can't understand God, and the Zohar says we can't understand God. Yet I can understand, don't steal, it's not good.
We can't understand the essence of God, but He has revealed His will and His mind to us through the mitzvah.
Through the mitzvah. And again,
which they call here His humility.
And where His greatness is found, there also is found His humility. That's in the Talmud Tractate Megillah. It's talking about the fact that I know that this is godly, right? I know it's godly not to steal. I know it's godly to give charity. At the same point, how amazing is, I mean, you know how big God is, right? God is infinite. And it's brought all the way down and filtered all the way down to this little nugget of something I can really understand. Don't steal. Okay?
But that's a little essence of his mind, His intellect, His heart, and His will.
Right. So you found His greatness there because you found Him right there. At the same point, when you found that, you just found His humility as well, because He is so great, and I found it in this grain of sand, right? That's part of where we're jumping up here.
For the Holy One, blessed is He, has compressed His will
contracted
and wisdom within the 613 commandments of the Torah and in their laws, as well as within the combination of the letters of the Torah, the books of the prophets, and the writings, and in the exposition thereof, which are to be found in Agadot and Midrashim of our rabbis of blessed memory.
So basically that whole sentence, he just summed up the entire gamut of what we call Torah, all right? The written Torah, the oral Torah, all of it.
All this in order that each neshama, or ruach, and nefesh in the human body should be able to comprehend them through its faculty of understanding and to fulfill them as far as they can be fulfilled in act, speech, and thought, thereby clothing itself with all its 10 faculties in these 3 garments.
So we are comfortable with that at this point?
Yeah, actually, I was just reading back over the previous sentence and how it got really mystical, because it said not only is His will and wisdom in the 613 commandments, which are revealed to us, they're also in the combinations of the letters of the Torah. Now, this is getting really mystical.
Well, and we had said earlier about the difference between Peshat and Midrash, right? There's a story behind the story. The fact that Abraham was in a fiery furnace is a major part of our faith, right? But a lot of people don't even know about it because it's not written in the Bible. That order of those letters is important, right? Because it contains Bible codes. It gives you other messages.
I guess someone could say, to the extent that any human creature who's supposed to be created in the image of God, in their will, in their daily lives, in where we live, in linear time, as we perceive it, to the extent that that person with their will, with their action, with their energy, with their thoughts, with their resources, etc., does not do the will of God, does not adhere to, submit to, love, cherish, seek, etc., the commandments of God. To that extent, at least, that person adds more layers of separation, more layers of oblivion to who God is and how He is and what He thinks and His attributes, etc., and thus cannot go beyond that to know Him. Can't know Him any more than that.
You close yourself off with all this negativity, right?
And so the transformation process is truncated. It's stopped.
Right. And you stopped it.
And so it's a process of a child finding the heart of his father and saying, I want to please you. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you. And so you can't just say, well, I think I know what pleases you. That's what I'm going to do.
Right. That's not
Which
how it
people
works.
do all the time.
And there's nothing in this world
People do
that
all
you
the
go to do where you show up, you fill out an application, you say, okay, well, I know what you guys want. Don't talk to me.
Yeah. Doesn't work.
You don't get promoted, you don't get approved as parents with their children, etc. It's a whole, it's there in everything
Right.
for us to know. And so when you're told, you have a choice.
Right.
Your will becomes involved.
And that's such an important thing. And that's the reason why we're still in this period of correction, as the Kabbalists call it, where we are trying to fix this thing that went wrong in Eden, right? Or went right.
So there's a dissonance
Right.
that is already
That's
there.
what I'm talking.
That tikkun, that
Good
teshuva
word.
of the human race is supposed to be pursuing to come back to God
This great culmination.
and stop that running in the other direction.
Right. Which is bringing us actually backwards in that process,
Like
right?
with
Isaiah
Israel.
said we're only in exile because of our continued
Coming
sins.
back from exile.
Right.
Coming back.
What he said was so Kabbalistic. That's
Yeah.
like the whole Kalipot right there is exactly what he said.
Yep.
Is they do it themselves. So, I mean...
And that has to do with our sleep and everything.
It
You know,
has
why
to
you
do
have
with
bad dreams?
everything,
Because
and the-
every
Now,
day.
see, I had all that stuff before I came to class.
There you go.
You go,
Baruch
baby.
Hashem. The other end of this book,
But
right?
you know what I love? You know what I love is when I hear stuff said that, like, the Lord's been saying to me for 20 years.
Right, and
I
now
haven't
it's
had
in print.
anybody
You know?
to discuss it with, or anyone else go, hey man, have you ever thought about this? I mean, I'm sitting there talking to the Lord by myself.
Right. And so many people come out of the woodwork and they find people like us. There's not a lot of people like us, I guess, but but they feel like they're islands, you know, and they feel like it's just been them for so long, and God, and you know,
they're
they have
hungry.
these like real, actual Torah thoughts that the Spirit has given them, and they have nothing to do with it. It's like
Yeshua said,
burning a
my
hole in their
sheep
pocket.
hear my voice.
That's exactly right.
Another will they won't follow.
Right,
That's right.
My sheep hear my voice.
and God will call us all out
It's
of
like,
Babylon
man, you hear
before
a
the
song that's like, that's my song, dog.
end.
Then you're like, you know,
Right.
it rejoices in you in your heart. It makes you happy.
Baruch Hashem.
Very
So-
comforting.
On that point, remember the section that we're in right now is this light blue on top. It's all about spiritual composition. This is the way the world functions, right? Us included.
Continue reading, Rabbi.
Sure, if you like.
Therefore has the Torah been compared to water. For
Very
just as
important.
water descends from a higher to a lower level, so has the Torah descended from its place of glory, which is his will and wisdom.
He's Baruch.
Blessed be he. For the Torah and the Holy One, blessed is he, are one and the same, and no thought can apprehend him at all.
Amen. So that phrase, for that quote from the Talmud is very important. We should all memorize it. It's in Tractate Bava Kama, page 17, side A. Ein mayim ela Torah. There is no water other than Torah, right? So Torah is compared to water, specifically because it comes from a very high place and it goes down to a very low place, but it's the same water, right? That's why in heaven mitzvahs look different, and there's no reward for them there,
What
right?
was the quote? No what?
Ein mayim ela Torah. There is no
There's no
water
water.
except Torah.
You first time said other than Torah.
Ella.
Say again, Ein Mayim
Ella Torah.
Ela Torah. Ela Torah.
Ella means
This
No
next
water
except
except
other
from
than-
Torah.
Other than.
something like that.
this
And how
next
do you s-
sentence
how do you
is
spell
really
the
really
Jewish
good.
part?
In mayim ela Torah? I'm not sure.
A.
E-I-N.
No water,
Ein mayim
no water
ela
other than
Torah.
Torah.
E-L-A. There's no hay on it, I don't think. And then
E-L.
Torah. Actually, there might be a hay. I don't know. God bless you.
From there, the Torah has progressively descended through hidden stages, stage after stage, with the descent of the worlds.
This is called Histalshilut. The
Histalshilut.
chain-like descent from high to low.
Until
And how many are there again?
Lots. Like, technically infinite.
50? 50 steps down, 50
Oh,
steps
50
up.
gates of
50
understanding?
gates.
That's a process we go through.
This is almost like the Tzimtzumim process.
This is the Simsumim.
This is it.
Histalshilut is Simsumim.
And why, look at what's coming next. What is it? Until?
Let him read it.
Go ahead.
From there, the Torah has progressively descended through hidden stages, stage after stage, with the descent of the worlds. until it clothed itself in corporeal substances and in the things of this world,
Therefore, we can comprehend them, right?
comprising almost all of the commandments of the Torah, their laws, and in the combinations of material letters, written with ink in a book, namely,
Very physical,
24 volumes of the Torah, prophets, and writings.
The All Tanakh is categorized like that.
All this in order that every thought should be able to apprehend them, and even the faculties of speech and action, which are on a lower level than thought, should be able to apprehend them and be clothed in them.
Right. So
There's
how
a
do
lot
we,
in there.
there's a lot in there. Hope not.
Okay.
That's the grace of God.
So we have this concept of Histalshalut. Torah is coming down through many different levels to the point where it's actually enclosed in a cow or an ox, right? And it says, if your ox gores my cow, right, then you have to pay such and such amount, right? If your flame burns my field, then you have to pay such and such amount. And these are things we can kind of understand, and it's actually God's will in that situation. Of course, God had to craft this entire world and that specific situation for us to be able to understand His will, which is why things happen, and then we have the choice to do mitzvahs about them or not. But this is the process of our union with God, right?
So
it's
this-
mystical wisdom. However, it's contained within mundane objects so that we can engage in them and understand them and fully wrap our minds around it.
So Histashalut is progressive descent?
Chain-like descent, right?
Hmm.
How do we feel about that? Pretty good?
That's good.
All right. Ema here has reminded us about time, so let's move on if we can.
Thus, since the Torah and its commandments clothe all 10 faculties of the soul with all its 613 organs from head to foot, it, the soul, is altogether truly bound up in the bundle of life with God, and the very light of God envelops and clothes it from head to foot, as it is written, God is my rock,
Hashem
I will
Tzuri.
take refuge in him.
Right? This process of the bundle of life, I'll just say really quickly, is Mashiach, right? That's the process. The whole idea of getting saved, that's this bundle of life that we need to somehow get intertwined with. This is the olive tree we need to be grafted into, right? That's this bundle of life.
And it is also written, you will envelop him with favor,
Ratzon.
Ratzon, will, as with a shield. That is to say, with his will and wisdom, blessed be he, which are clothed in his Torah and its commandments.
Very true. So, again, and there's a concept, I think I wrote a note about it here. The Torah is actually compared to bread as well, right? It's like our food and our water.
From heaven.
Right. So the Torah is food, but it's also garments, because you can think about Torah, you can speak about Torah, so it's garments. And the mitzvot are just garments, but the Torah is food and garments. Okay?
Hence it is said, better is 1 hour of repentance and good deeds in this world than the whole life of the world to come.
So that's a very famous and often misunderstood statement. And I remember when I was first, well, let's not use any names or anything like that, but I spoke with a gentleman one time, and then when I first met him, I had just studied this, and I was like, hey, what do you think about this? He was a nice gentleman from a Christian denomination. And I had said, it says, better is 1 hour of good deeds and teshuvah in this world than a whole life in the world to come. What do you say about this, Pastor? Right? And he said to me, I don't believe that at all. And he just shut it down. So, I mean, obviously this is very misunderstood, but it's written in the Talmud, so how are we to understand it? What does it mean? Let's go ahead and read.
For the world to come is that state where one enjoys the effulgence of the divine presence, which is the pleasure of comprehension. Yet no created being, even celestial, can comprehend more than some reflection of the divine light. That is why the reference is to effulgence of the divine presence.
So,
Effulgence.
effulgence. What's an effulgence? It's like a ray, like a laser of energy, right? It's an
eminence.
emanation of that. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. It's like a radiation, right? So what he's saying is in the world to come, and here by the world to come, we specifically mean in heaven before resurrection, okay? Though let's just go with that for now. In heaven before resurrection, what's the reward that you get there? People are happy in heaven, right? They're not miserable? Well, some people are miserable, but it's only for a short time.
Well, the reward there is nothing because all the rewards are stored up.
You don't get
Or
rewarded.
you get there.
You don't really get rewarded in heaven for the physical mitzvot that you did because you don't have a body. How could you get a physical reward? What do you have in heaven? You still have your soul, which means you have the ability to think, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the reward? You bask in the ray of the Shekhinah, the divine presence. Right. The garments, these garments that you stored up for, this wealth that you stored up for yourself is going to determine your reward in heaven when you die. So the more Torah you study down here, the more you'll be able to understand there, and that's your reward. Up there, it's just understanding. You just get to see everything, and that's pretty cool.
Sky always says is like, if you hate studying Torah, heaven is not going to be such a happy place for you because guess what?
It's just a big Torah class, right?
Hysterical.
It's a bad joke, I guess.
That's so funny, though.
But the
It's
idea
a
is,
good joke.
they say heaven and hell is the same place. It's a big Torah class. So, anyways, but it's not. But it is.
It's funny.
But it's not. So that whole concept, we are just engaging in comprehension of God's awesomeness. This is a pretty cool day, right? And it lasts until we get resurrected. What is the limiting factor in that equation, in that relationship?
In the comprehension part,
In the comprehension part. Us, right?
we're limited.
I'm limited in my understanding and my comprehension, right? Mm-hmm. My soul is rooted on a certain level. I can understand this and not this, and I've read this and I haven't read that.
Well,
so our reward is based on
as the limitation of your mental capacity.
exactly.
Right?
That's what we're talking about. That applies here. So when we're in that place,
The limitation applies in the Olam Haba as well.
that's also true. We're not talking about that right here, but it's also true. So when we're in heaven before the resurrection, we're just understanding godliness. So if you have never read the Bible, it's going to be a tough time for you. If you've read every word of the Bible but weren't able to understand certain bits of it, it's going to be a wonderful day for you because God's going to show you what those words that you saw meant.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I think there's a remedial class for some of those people.
I think so. I hope so. But it's not a physical reward, you know? So, what happens when we do an actual mitzvah down here, or we engage in teshuvah down here? We just talked about it.
The bottom line is we're changing that. Once you're up there, you can't change anything.
That's
it's
a big
done.
point.
It's
That's
set.
a big point, but it goes deeper. Down here, when we give tzedakah, we're clothed. We are like God's hand in this thing. God is clothed in us, and we're clothed in God's mitzvot, and it's a shield for us, and it's food for us, it's garments for us, right? We have this amazing mystical unity, intimacy union that we're engaging in with God here. Yichud, this thing is happening here, right? Up there, you're just thinking about it. Okay, you're thinking about it at a much, much higher level than we could here. 50% of your brain, 100%, who cares? The point is here, you're actually engaging in intimacy with God. It's a deeper, more profound union with God than it is by just basking in the ray of His presence.
Which is why the angels even want to be us.
The angels want to be us, right? Exactly. That's why.
And we want to be the angels. You
Yeah.
never want. It's crazy. Just crazy.
So that's an important concept.
I don't want to be an angel.
Me neither.
I
Baruch
just want to be
Hashem.
me.
I want to be the best of me.
Yes, that's a good one. I want to be the best in me.
So better is 1 hour of repentance and good deeds in this world than a whole life in the world to come, because a whole life in the world to come is limited on you, right? But when I'm giving a mitzvah, if I'm doing tzedakah, I'm connected to infinity at that moment. It's better. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But as for the essence of the Holy One, blessed is He, no thought can apprehend Him at all, except when it apprehends and is clothed in the Torah and its mitzvot. Only then does it truly apprehend and is clothed in the Holy One, blessed is He, inasmuch as the Torah and the Holy One, blessed is He, are one and the same.
Right. So how can I ever understand God? The fact is you can't. You're a creation. He's the creator. However, He made these He made these mitzvot so that I can connect to Him. A good parable of this is Einstein and a gentleman who is not very wise, right? There's Einstein and then there's the janitor of the building or whatever. And Einstein asks the guy, hey, listen, I'm in the middle of something. Could you go grab me a cup of coffee, right? If that guy gets the coffee for Einstein, that guy's now connected to Einstein, right? He's not doing the equations and stuff, but he's got a relationship and there's a connection there, right? God established this way that we can have this connection relationship with him by clothing his innermost essence in mundane material activity so that we can wrap our brain around the mundane activity and find God within, right? And there we also find his humility.
It kind of reminds me where it says, God uses the foolish to trip the wise.
Mm-hmm.
He uses the mitzvot that exact way.
Yeah.
It's so small and common and seems so useless.
Yeah, be nice to your
that
mom.
everybody is like, oh, that can't be what he means.
What if it is? What if it is?
Isn't that crazy?
Quick thoughts? Let's move on.
For although the Torah has been clothed in lower material things, it is by way of illustration, like embracing the king. There is no difference in regard to the degree of closeness and attachment to the king, whether while embracing the king, the latter is then wearing one robe or several robes, so long as the royal person is in them.
Right, if you go to the Capitol and the king comes off the chariot and he comes and he gives you a hug and the king's wearing 7 robes because he's a king, and you go back home, he's like, guess what, I met the king. Oh, yeah, really? Yeah, and he even hugged me, too. He was like, nah, he didn't hug you. He was wearing clothes, the clothes hugged you. What do you say to that person? You say you're an idiot, right? The king hugged me. Who cares what he was wearing?
He and his clothes are one.
Essentially, in this parable, that's true, right?
Likewise, when the king, for his part, embraces one with his arm, even though it is dressed in his robe, so as it is written, and his right hand embraces me, which refers to the Torah, which was given by God's right hand, which was the quality of chesed and water.
So he's just kind of cleaning up and linking all these concepts that we've just touched on throughout the chapter. And that's chapter 4.
That was awesome.
It sure was. It was excellent.
Wasn't it excellent? That was
Do we have thoughts, questions on that last bit? It's pretty straightforward, I think. But
I love how how we find Yeshua in all of this.
absolutely
I
true.
just am crazy in love with it.
Amen.
Right. Let's if there's any topic-related questions that are quick, let's have them right now. Otherwise, let's close with prayer, please, so we can get the camera time down.
Okay. Lisa, you want to pray?
I do. Okay, Avinu Matenu, our Father, our King, we thank you again for another beautiful lesson. Thank you so very much for making your Torah sweet to our lips, and we just appreciate you. We love you, and we just adore everything that you do for us, and we thank you again for another night of Tanya, and we look forward to another week of learning, and we bless you in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Todah. All right. I guess that concludes for this week. We'll have a little bit more discussion. Want to get our camera for us? Thank you again. See you next week.